Abigail, and I'm here again with Brian, and today in this chapter we are going to be talking about the individuals that you as a leadership team in a church engaged as you went through this journey as a church. So why did you engage outside professionals, and what are some of the disciplines that you drew on?
Yeah, it's a great question. Again, when such a firestorm hits, you're on your heels and trying to think of every possible scenario and angle, and also thinking about optics and everything else. It's all happening at the same time. But very quickly you learn that this is, first of all, that there's no way you can think of all the questions. Mm-hmm. And so the need for referrals or other additional resources is without question. Mm-hmm. And so my posture has always been that I am not a lone ranger. I have both a leadership team, but also outside of that is a huge network of relationships and so forth that I've been privileged to develop over the years, and now to be able to leverage that, leverage that network for what it's worth, and to be able to tap into those resources that can come into play, and to help us in this moment of need. So I mentioned earlier about the legal counsel that we receive, which that goes without saying, that there would be, to some degree, some legal counsel that wisdom would say you should get to help navigate this, particularly maybe in a way of a statement, and that you don't open yourself up to other complications. The other thing that can easily be forgotten would be just in conversation with your insurance carrier. And I recall, I didn't reach out to our insurance till about 3 days later. And when I finally made the call, the response on the other end was, I was waiting on your call. Mm. They already knew about everything that happened, and it was kind of the buzz among their team there at the insurance company. How do we prepare? How do they prepare for what may be forthcoming? And so I had a number of conversations with our insurance broker along the way in the weeks that unfolded. Praise be to God, that none of those fears were realized. But nonetheless, again, another professional or another resource that we benefited and leveraged to our advantage in this moment. But then also just from a pastoral care or from a pastoral counseling standpoint was how do we care for the congregation during this time? And so that became right out of the gate. Said a couple of things. We want to be fully transparent as best we can. Mm-hmm. The more communication that we can lead with is going to be a huge asset. And so we planned an event 2 days after this was all, after the arrest of a worship service. Mm-hmm. And in the meantime, I had gotten a letter from the individual who was arrested, who was on staff with us as a pastor of student ministries. And it was a letter of an apology. Mm-hmm. And so we had this service there for that Wednesday evening, 2 days afterwards. And I didn't know what to do with this letter. And so here was a case where, again, leveraging these other resources to your advantage, I simply asked the therapist that we work with, said, what do I do with this letter? Mm-hmm. Initially I was thinking, well, we'll just read it at that public service. Mm-hmm. And he cautioned us. He cautioned me, he says, I would not read it. He says, you have no idea what's in the congregation, where they're at, and even what other victims may be out there, mm-hmm. or persons who themselves were victims from years before in another situation. So I listened to him, took his counsel, and did not read it. But what we did do was say that we have a letter. Mm-hmm. And but if you would like this read, we will not print it, we will not publish it, we will not email it. It will not be available except for one-on-one reading or small group reading. And after that service was over that night, and made that announcement to the congregation was I had, I think, 4 persons come up to me and say, thank you. Thank you for not reading the letter.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not ready for that. Or there's things in my past that would have been traumatic or would have been triggers. And so there was another case of being able to leverage that in the whole idea of congregational care. How do you care for a community that is, first of all, in shell shock, and then secondly, could be all over the place, and some wanting justice and some wanting to be long-suffering and some wanting forgiveness, and so you have all that kind of swimming together. So that was that service, that particular service. We worked at the congregational care aspect of trying to break apart both the needs of our students and our children, along with the needs of just a congregation, or having a place to be able to grieve and to acknowledge what has happened. So that particular evening, we did plan it in 2 events. We had, the first part was purely a narrative. This is what happened, and everybody was present for that, all ages, and wanted everybody to hear the same story, and just gave probably about a 20 to 30 minute narrative of this is what happened, this is what we know, this is what we don't know, and this is what it's going to look like going forward. And that was immensely helpful from the congregation. Much appreciation for that. And then we dismissed all of our students, and they had their own session then at that point in time. But then the bulk of the rest of the evening then with the adults that remained was simply time of prayer and intercession. We brought in other resources from our conference. Our bishop was there, our moderator was there, and just tried to leverage again where we need care. I needed cared for. I needed to be cared for as well as did our pastoral team. So that's just an example of that congregational care aspect, and what that unfolded here in his first couple days. But Abby, you were obviously involved in caring for both parents and children, particularly. And what are some things that you did about was helpful to giving care to both families and to children in the days that followed?
Yeah. Well, on that night, at the prayer night, I serve as a junior youth leader for middle school, and so I was a part of their time after we heard that narrative, and it was just very sobering to sit with all of these youth just as they would come in and sit down, and then we walk downstairs and just being with them, not necessarily talking about anything or anything related to what had happened, but just knowing that they were going through so much. And I probably knew more of, kind of had a better sense of what was going on, and I had a lot to work through, but yet they were even more in the dark of exactly what had gone down. And so I just kind of really felt for them. And so our time downstairs, we had a therapist who, the same one that gave you counsel about the letter, he shared with us about grief and just walking the kids through the validity of all the pieces of grief, and that every person is going to go through it differently. And I think that was really helpful, because that's so true. Every youth and every leader that was there that night is going to handle it differently, yet you're all one group, and you're going to continue to walk through this together, and that we need to be sensitive to one another in this time. And I think that was very timely for them. And then we split between high school and middle school and had our own time of processing, because the age difference is also very large, and the high schoolers had a very different relationship with the pastor of student ministries than even the middle schoolers did, because they were led very specifically by the pastor of student ministries, while the junior hires would interact with them, but they had their own group. So just processing with them was very, I think, helpful for them, even though they may not have talked, but to just hear their leaders talk, or to hear a therapist validate what they were going through, I think was very needed in those first days. And then in the weeks that followed, we put out a survey to parents asking them, where are you at? What do you need? What do your children need? And from that, we saw the necessity to have some sort of event to resource parents and to answer these questions, because they went past the abilities and the knowledge of us, of me, of our leadership team. And so we resourced a couple of therapists that I worked closely with, and just kind of outlining what questions seemed to just come up over and over again, what seemed to be the major needs here. And it became very clear what those things were. And when you have such a variety of age of parents, or a variety of parents with kids of a variety of ages, there's obviously different concerns at different age levels. So whether it's, how do I talk to my children about this situation, or how do I tell my child just to protect them? How do I protect them going forward? And how do I be aware of what's going on around them, around me? And so yeah, as we just worked through what that night would look like, we put together a panel that the parents were going to come to, or it would be open to them. And but that was, it seems like, oh yeah, we'll just come up with answers to these questions and there you go. But we had to be very careful, because the parents were all in such different places as well, that we wanted to be very sensitive to where they were at and answer their questions well without having it be triggering to other people. And then the ending portion of that night, of the 2 hours, the last 30 minutes, we invited the pre-teenage group, 4th to 6th grade, to be a part of this panel. And that was especially difficult because the parents are at all different places in how they want to share this situation with their children, or what they want to share in general with their children. And so we wanted to be clear and answer questions if we could, and kind of calm some of the confusion that they may be feeling, but also be very mindful of what parents would think of what we said, because they were still there in the room. And so we spent that time, speaking very directly to them, but in a gentle way, in a general way, so that they could feel as though their questions were answered without saying too much. And I think that the therapists did a really good job of that. And then I had the opportunity to talk to them about how we move forward, how they, if they find themselves in an uncomfortable situation, what they can do, and how to say no to an uncomfortable situation. And so to leverage my relationship with them as the director of children's ministries, I think that was really helpful. Either of the therapists would have done an excellent job as well, but they also encouraged me to be the one to speak into that, because I do have the relationship with this age group as I'm involved with them at church. And so I think that was all a really special time, and I just got so many comments from parents about how helpful that was, and even people that weren't necessarily parents of children of this age right now, but teachers and grandparents. They all found it helpful, and we had recorded it so that others could watch it as well later for reference. And then we also offered all sorts of books that they could look at, that they could potentially purchase on their own, that would speak into human sexuality, into being safe, or when we come to unsafe situations, how to respond. And I think that was helpful and appreciated as well.
I mean, that's really good, and I think a really key part of the whole part of care, care for the whole. And a couple of words that I'm just hearing you come away with is transparency and approachability, and also being nimble enough to adjust to the needs of the congregation, even when we don't quite know how to script it, but to be able to pull in resources that can help us do that well. So thanks again, Abby, for your part and for sharing with us today, and thanks again for being part of this chapter here today as we talk about congregational care.